The man who does not chase women is not empty. He is not bitter, and he is not broken. He is simply awake. From the very beginning of his life, he was told that his worth depended on pursuit, that the meaning of his days was tied to whether or not someone else saw him as desirable. He was told in movies, in music, in the stories passed from older men to younger ones, that the mark of success was not freedom, not mastery, not even happiness, but validation. The proof of manhood was her approval, her interest, her smile. And for years, like so many before him, he believed it. He ran the race, he chased, he fought to be seen. But eventually, something inside him began to fracture. He began to see the patterns too clearly to ignore. He began to notice how the game was always tilted against him, how no matter what he gave, no matter how much he sacrificed, the reward always dissolved into smoke. At first he thought it was his fault. Perhaps he was not charming enough, not wealthy enough, not funny enough, not handsome enough. He doubled his efforts, spent more money, he tried new tactics, he swallowed the advice of friends and strangers, bent himself into shapes he could not recognize, all in the hope that one day someone would finally say, "You are enough." But the truth was not that he was lacking. The truth was that the chase itself was designed to leave him lacking. The chase was never about connection, it was about exhaustion. It was a ritual of depletion, a system that fed on his hunger and rewarded him with crumbs. One night, he sat in silence after another hollow date, another wallet emptied, another smile that never reached the eyes of the woman across from him. The noise of the city hummed outside, but inside he felt only stillness. A question formed, not on his lips but deep in his bones. What if I stop? What if I refuse? What if I no longer play? And though the question terrified him, it also carried a strange kind of peace. For the first time, he considered that maybe his life did not need to orbit around the approval of others. Maybe his value was not in the chase, but in the being. When he stopped, the world reacted with hostility. His friends mocked him. They told him he was bitter. They told him he was giving up. They told him he was less of a man. They pushed him back toward the noise, toward the endless cycle of pursuit, because his refusal made them uncomfortable. If one man could step away, what excuse did they have for continuing? His detachment was a mirror, and they did not like what they saw. The women he knew responded with confusion, sometimes with anger. They accused him of arrogance, of being cold, of thinking himself above them. But it was not arrogance that moved him, it was clarity. He no longer believed the lie that his life's worth was measured by the attention he could gather. He no longer believed that desperation was destiny. Society itself seemed to tighten around him. Every advertisement, every story, every cultural whisper tried to pull him back. They told him he was incomplete, that he was missing something essential, that he could not be whole without pursuit. But he had already tasted freedom, and once a man tastes it, he cannot go back. He realized that the one who does not chase is not empty, but overflowing, because his time, his energy, his purpose are no longer siphoned away. He has reclaimed himself. In that reclamation, he begins to build. He spends his evenings, not in bars or clubs, but in silence, in study, in creation. He learns new skills. He sharpens his mind. He strengthens his body. He writes, he paints, he builds businesses, he explores. He does not wait for permission to live. He simply lives. Slowly, his life begins to take on weight and shape. Not the shallow shape of approval, but the deep structure of self-mastery. And yet the more he grows, the more dangerous he appears. It's not because he threatens anyone directly, but because he embodies what most men secretly long for: independence from the game. Other men see him and feel envy, though they mask it with jokes. Women see him and feel curiosity, though they disguise it with accusations. Society at large sees him and feels unease, because he is proof that a man can exist fully without bending to the ritual of chase. He is not cold. He is simply free. He is not cruel. He is simply unwilling to lie to himself anymore. He understands that love, if it comes, must be a meeting of equals, not a performance of desperation. And so he does not chase, not because he is incapable, but because he refuses to betray himself for an illusion. He waits, not in passivity, but in power. He waits because his life is already full. He waits because he knows that nothing worth having can be forced. But in the quiet of his days, he also feels the weight of isolation. Freedom is not without cost. To step outside the chase is to step outside the herd, and the herd does not easily forgive. He loses friends, he loses status, he loses the easy comfort of belonging. Yet in losing these things he finds something greater, himself. And that discovery is worth every loss. Years pass, and the man who does not chase becomes unrecognizable to his former self. He carries himself differently. He speaks differently. He moves through the world with a calm that cannot be faked. When others scramble, he remains steady. When others beg, he remains silent. When others collapse under the weight of rejection, he continues walking, untouched. His power is not loud, but it is unmistakable. It is the power of one who has mastered himself. He sees now that the chase was never about love. It was about control. A system that kept men distracted, exhausted, and compliant. A system that sold them fantasies and drained their strength. By stepping out of it, he has not only freed himself, he has exposed the truth. That real worth is not given, it is claimed. Real strength is not in pursuit, it is in presence. Real love is not a prize, it is a partnership. So he walks forward, alone but not lonely, detached but not numb, silent but not weak. The world calls him dangerous, and they are right. For the man who does not chase cannot be manipulated, cannot be sold, cannot be broken. He belongs to himself, and in a world that thrives on dependency, that is the most terrifying thing of all. He began to notice how silence itself was a language. Where once he filled the air with explanations, with apologies, with attempts to prove his worth, now he let silence stretch. He discovered that people reveal themselves not when you chase them, but when you do nothing. They cannot stand silence for long. They rush to fill it with their expectations, their judgments, their desires. And in those moments, he saw more truth than in all the words spoken during years of pursuit. The women who once demanded his energy grew uneasy when he gave them none. They projected motives onto him. He must be hiding something. He must be arrogant. He must be cold. But all he was doing was existing without begging. And that alone was enough to unravel them. He walked differently now, not with the slouch of one hoping to be chosen, but with the calm of one who has already chosen himself. Every step carried a weight that came not from arrogance, but from grounding. He no longer lived in a state of reaching. The desperate lean of a man who longs for approval had left him, replaced with a stillness that could not be purchased or borrowed. When others leaned toward the world, pleading, he stood back, observing, understanding that to need nothing is to be untouchable. Yet freedom was not a shield from struggle. If anything, freedom made the world push harder against him. Institutions and industries that thrived on the hunger of men found no place in him. He was not easily advertised to, for he no longer believed that happiness could be bought with the right clothes, the right cologne, the right car, the right display of wealth meant to impress. He was not easily manipulated, for he no longer tied his sense of self to external validation. And when manipulation fails, resentment follows. People resented his refusal to play. They called him names meant to shame him back into compliance. They whispered that he must be broken, that he must be afraid, that he must be hiding wounds he could not face. But he knew the truth. The wound was not in him, it was in the world. The longer he lived outside the chase, the more he saw how deep the sickness ran. He saw men destroy themselves financially, emotionally, even physically, just to keep up the performance of being desirable. He saw marriages crumble because they had been built, not on truth, but on exhaustion, one person forever running, while the other forever withheld. He saw young men lose their futures before they had even begun, addicted to the mirage of pleasure that never satisfied. Feeding industries that saw them as nothing but endless sources of profit. The chase was not romance. It was consumption disguised as connection. The machine kept running because most men never questioned it. They thought it was life itself, not a trap. In the quiet of his nights, he thought of what love might look like if stripped of all this performance. Could it exist? Could two people meet without the weight of expectations, without the rituals of pursuit and withholding, without the endless games? He believed it was possible, but rare. It would require two people who had both stepped out of the chase, who had both chosen themselves first. Anything less would always collapse back into imbalance, into control and surrender. So he waited, not for a fantasy, but for reality. If it never came, he would not mourn, for he already had himself, and that was enough. His days filled with purpose that once would have seemed unimaginable. Hours once wasted in longing were now spent in creation. He became a builder not only of things, but of himself. He trained his body not to be admired, but to be strong. He sharpened his mind, not to impress, but to understand. He explored ideas, books, philosophies, not to quote them at dinners, but to weave them into the very fabric of his being. Slowly, he became the kind of man that others tried to imitate, though they could not understand the root of his strength. They copied his style, his habits, even his words, but missed the essence. For his power did not come from surface, it came from foundation. It came from the fact that he needed nothing outside himself to be whole. And yet, the more he grew, the lonelier the path became. Not the loneliness of emptiness, but the loneliness of separation. The higher he climbed, the fewer people there were beside him. Most preferred the comfort of the chase, even as it drained them, because at least it was familiar. Freedom is terrifying to those who have only known chains. And so he walked roads few dared to walk, not because he wanted to be above anyone, but because he could not lie to himself anymore. The truth had set him apart, and there was no return. He remembered a time when rejection shattered him, and a single no from a woman could spiral him into days of self-doubt, of questioning his worth, of wondering what he could do differently. But rejection meant nothing now, because he no longer chased. If someone did not choose him, it did not disturb his balance. If someone walked away, it did not steal his peace. For how can you lose what you never begged for? How can you be broken by something you do not worship? Rejection was only a wound if you believed approval was the medicine. He no longer believed that. His medicine was his own being. There were moments when temptation whispered. Old habits clawed at him. He would see other men boasting of conquests, of attention, of validation, and for a flicker he would feel left behind. But then he would remember the hollowness of those victories, the emptiness that always followed the applause, and he would return to himself stronger for having resisted. Discipline became not a burden, but a liberation. Every temptation resisted was a chain broken. He began to see life not as a series of opportunities to gain approval, but as a canvas to shape. He was an artist now, and the medium was his own existence. Each day he painted with choices: what to learn, what to build, how to grow. And slowly, the masterpiece emerged, not in the eyes of others, but in the quiet certainty within him. He did not need to be admired to know it was beautiful. The work itself was the proof. Those who still chased could not understand him. They thought he must be missing something essential. They tried to draw him back, to convince him that without pursuit, he was incomplete. But he saw the weariness in their eyes, the desperation in their laughter, the fragility beneath their bravado. He did not judge them. He had been them once, but he pitied them, for they could not see the chains they carried. They thought the chains were ornaments, proof of living. They did not know they were prisoners. He wondered if the world would ever change, if men would ever collectively wake up and realize that their worth was never meant to be bartered for attention. If women would ever stop mistaking validation for love, control for power, perhaps not in his lifetime, but he knew at least one man had broken free, and one is enough. For freedom spreads not through force, but through example. Somewhere someone would see him and realize they too could stop running. And in that small awakening, the world would shift. He lived now as if each day was borrowed, as if the time he once wasted chasing could never be reclaimed, but could be redeemed. Every hour mattered. Every choice carried weight. He no longer sought escape in distractions, for he no longer needed to escape. His life was not something to flee from, but something to build into. And that building was endless, a lifelong work of art, a sculpture never finished. As the years carved their lines into his face, he found he was grateful for them. They were not marks of decay, but of becoming. Every wrinkle was proof that he had lived on his own terms, that he had not spent his life as a shadow chasing light that never stayed. He had become the light. And those who once mocked him, who once called him bitter, now carried envy in their aging eyes. For while they grew tired from running, he grew strong from standing still.